The last place James Gandolfini was seen alive was room 449 of the Hotel Boscolo Excedra Roma in Rome, Italy, a luxury suite on the top floor. The kind of room that overlooks the Fountain of the Naiads in the Piazza della Repubblica, one of the most beautiful squares in one of the most beautiful cities on Earth. And when his 14-year-old son, Michael, found him unresponsive on the bathroom floor at around 10 o'clock on the evening of June 19, 2013, the entire financial architecture of one of the most lucrative careers in the history of American television suddenly had no one left to manage it. And I am not saying that the way people say it is to get clicks. I am saying it because what James Gandolfini had built, what he was being paid, what his estate contained, and what happened to approximately $30 million of that estate in the months after his death is one of the most genuinely staggering financial stories in the history of American television. A story with a number in it that will absolutely floor you. And it is not the number you think it is. Most people know the broad outline. Actor plays iconic role. Actor dies young. World mourns. Story over. But that is not the story. That is not even close to the story. Because what was sitting inside the financial architecture of James Gandolfini's life at the moment he died in that hotel room, what the Sopranos had been generating for years while almost nobody was doing the full math out loud, is something that will completely change how you think about this man, this show, and this specific night in Rome. So let me break all of it down from the very beginning. Because if you do not understand what The Sopranos actually was at its peak, you are not going to understand the scale of what James Gandolfini was walking around with every single day of his professional life. The Sopranos premiered on HBO on January 10th, 1999. It was created by David Chase. It ran for 6 seasons and 86 episodes. According to the Television Academy's official records, concluding on June 10th, 2007, with a finale that generated more cultural debate than almost any single episode of television before or since. Over its run, according to those same Television Academy records, the show won 21 Primetime Emmy Awards from 111 nominations. It won 2 Peabody Awards in 2000 and 2001. And in June 2013, just days before Gandolfini died, the Writers Guild of America released its list of the 101 best-written TV series of all time, as reported by both Variety and The Hollywood Reporter on June 2nd and 3rd of that year. The Sopranos came in at number 1, not top 5. Number 1, James Gandolfini won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series 3 times, confirmed by the Television Academy, in 2000 for Season 1, in 2001 for Season 2, and again in 2003 for Season 4, 3 times, for the same character, in a category that is one of the most competitive in the entire awards landscape. And here is where the financial story begins, because the way his relationship with HBO evolved across those 6 seasons, the way the money grew, the way the leverage shifted, is a story that has never been told with the shape it actually had. But before we get there, let me tell you something about where James Gandolfini came from, because the distance between his starting point and that hotel suite in Rome is the part of this story that nobody gives enough attention to. He was born on September 18, 1961 in Westwood, New Jersey, to a working-class family of Italian descent. His father worked as a bricklayer, a cement mason, and later as head custodian at a high school, according to Wikipedia. His mother worked in school food service. These were not people with industry connections. These were not people with a financial safety net waiting underneath any career gamble he made. When James Gandolfini decided to become an actor, he was betting on himself with nothing behind him if it did not work. He worked as a bartender, a bouncer, and a nightclub manager before a friend persuaded him to take an acting class, according to his biography. He did small theater work. He built his craft slowly and without shortcuts. His early film appearances, supporting roles in films like True Romance in 1993 and Get Shorty in 1995, were the work of a man accumulating credits one at a time in a business designed to make that accumulation as difficult as possible. That background matters because it explains something specific about how he negotiated once he finally had something worth negotiating with. A man who came from nothing and built everything himself through a decade of grinding work understands the value of leverage in a way that someone who arrived with advantages never quite does. When the Sopranos gave Gandolfini leverage, he used it with the precision of someone who had spent years watching other people fail to hold theirs. When The Sopranos premiered in January 1999, Gandolfini was not yet a household name. He had those supporting film credits. He had done solid work. He was not the guaranteed commercial draw that would justify the kind of contract he eventually commanded, and HBO paid accordingly. The network understood they were taking a bet on an unproven lead in an unconventional show about a New Jersey mob boss in therapy. That bet paid off in ways nobody had anticipated. By the time The Sopranos had collected those early Emmy Awards and established itself as the defining drama of a new era of television, the negotiating landscape had shifted completely. Gandolfini and his representatives understood what they had. HBO understood what they had. And the salary conversation that followed reflected that mutual understanding as his earnings were significantly increased across successive seasons. But here is where things got genuinely strange. And this is the part that most people have never heard the full shape of. Between Season 4 and Season 5, James Gandolfini filed a lawsuit against HBO. According to detailed reporting by Collider and NJ Monthly, he had stopped engaging with contract negotiations in the way the network expected. HBO countersued, demanding $100 million in damages for what it characterized as a deliberate disruption to production. Let that sit for a moment. The most valuable actor on the most celebrated drama on American cable television and the network that made him famous were suing each other simultaneously. Both parties in court, lawyers issuing statements. Season 5 production delayed. The standoff was eventually resolved. Both lawsuits were dismissed. Gandolfini returned to the set. And Season 5, the season that nearly never happened, is the season that many critics and members of the Writers Guild point to as among the show's creative peaks. By the time Season 6 arrived, the two-part final run that aired in 2006 and 2007 across 21 episodes, according to the Television Academy, Gandolfini was earning $1 million per episode, according to Celebrity Net Worth and multiple entertainment industry sources. $1 million per episode for the lead of a show that the Writers Guild of America had just named the best-written television series of all time. Do the arithmetic on 21 episodes at that rate yourself. The number is not small, but the salary is not even the most interesting number in this story. Not even close. Because here is where it gets absolutely wild. James Gandolfini did not keep his good fortune sealed away from the people around him. According to Steve Schirripa, who played Bobby Bacalieri across multiple seasons of the show, speaking on New York radio station WFAN after Gandolfini's death in 2013, and confirmed in reporting by NJ Monthly, Gandolfini personally wrote checks of $33,000 each to 16 of his fellow cast members during production. He did it without announcement. He called each of them individually. He told them it was to say thank you for sticking by him during the contract dispute that had brought the production to a standstill. Schirripa told WFAN, in his own words, that it was like someone buying 16 people a car. That detail matters, because what it tells you about James Gandolfini is something the financial story alone does not tell you. He understood money. He understood leverage. He negotiated precisely and held firm against a network with an enormous legal budget and an enormous institutional incentive to contain his salary. And then he took a significant portion of what he won and gave it away to the people who had less of it than he did. That is a specific kind of character. That is someone who remembered where he came from, even after the numbers in his bank account stopped resembling anything from where he had started. Now let me tell you about Rome, because the hotel room is where this story has to arrive. And it is important that you understand what Gandolfini was carrying with him into that suite. In June 2013, Gandolfini was in Rome with his 14-year-old son, Michael. They were in Italy ahead of a scheduled appearance at the Taormina Film Festival in Sicily, where Gandolfini was set to receive an award. They had spent the day of June 19th sightseeing together in Rome. The director of the Taormina Film Festival described their time in the Italian capital to the press as a marvelous trip. Let me tell you what that trip actually meant in the context of his life. Gandolfini had been born to Italian immigrant parents. His father had come from Borgo Val di Taro in the Emilia-Romagna region. According to Wikipedia, Italy was not a foreign country to him in the tourist sense. It was his heritage, his origin. Taking his son there was something he had been looking forward to in a way that had nothing to do with awards or industry recognition, and everything to do with who his family was and where they had come from. He was not simply an actor on a festival circuit. He was a man showing his teenage son the country their blood came from. That evening, according to the timeline confirmed by Italian authorities and reported directly by ABC News on June 20, 2013, Michael Gandolfini was in the suite when he heard something from the bathroom. He found his father unresponsive on the floor. He called the front desk. Hotel staff called paramedics. Gandolfini arrived at the Policlinico Umberto I Hospital at approximately 10:40 in the evening, a timeline confirmed by Professor Claudio Modini, director of the hospital's emergency department. Speaking directly to ABC News, he was pronounced dead 6 minutes later. He was 51 years old. An autopsy confirmed the cause of death as a heart attack. He had been born on September 18, 1961, in Westwood, New Jersey. Let me tell you what happened next, because the moment that news broke around the world, the financial machinery that Gandolfini had spent more than a decade building suddenly had no one directing it. And what that machinery contained is the number that will absolutely change how you look at this story. When James Gandolfini's will was filed with a New York surrogate's court, in the weeks following his death, the documents entered the public record. Estate lawyer William Zabel described the will's structure to the New York Daily News, in his exact word, as a catastrophe. According to reporting by the New York Daily News in July 2013, confirmed by Crane's New York Business, and reviewed by multiple estate planning attorneys who spoke to various outlets, approximately 80% of his estimated $70 million estate was left exposed to taxation, with combined federal and New York State estate tax rates creating a bill estimated by those attorneys at approximately $30 million. $30 million. Not to his wife, not to his son, not to his daughter, who had been born in October 2012 and was still an infant when her father died. $30 million owed to the government because the will had not been structured with the tax protection instruments that estate lawyers say could have sheltered a significant portion of that exposure. The New York Times staged a public debate about the wisdom of the will, as noted in contemporaneous legal commentary. Crane's New York Business ran a headline in July 2013 stating that the heirs would not be pleased with their tax advisors. What the reporting across multiple outlets made clear was that a man of Gandolfini's wealth, with access to sophisticated legal and financial counsel, had a will that apparently did not reflect the full range of planning available to him. Whether that was because he genuinely did not expect to die at 51, or because he had priorities that outweighed the tax consequences, nobody outside his inner circle knows for certain. Some estate attorneys who reviewed the documents publicly suggested that his choices reflected a desire to provide equally for the people he loved, regardless of the tax efficiency of doing so. Others noted that a man who had only become wealthy in his early 40s and who was only 51 when he died may simply have believed he had decades ahead of him to refine the plan. What is known is that his family was likely required to sell assets to meet the tax obligation because the estate did not hold sufficient liquid cash to pay a bill of that size without liquidating property. That is the number hidden in the room, not cash in a closet. A $30 million consequence sitting inside the document that was supposed to protect everything he had built. The thing that the salary negotiations and the lawsuit and all those years of precisely managed leverage could not guard against, because it was not a professional problem. It was a planning one. And the man who could hold his ground against a network's legal team could not hold his ground against a tax code he had not yet gotten around to navigating. Now here is what makes that number even more striking when you place it alongside the full shape of the asset he left behind. In 2005, according to the Television Academy's official Sopranos by the Numbers record, the A&E network paid $200 million for the syndication rights to The Sopranos. The Television Academy notes explicitly that this was the highest sum ever paid for a syndicated show at that time, $200 million, for a show that was still in production, for the right to air reruns. That number tells you what the show was worth as a commercial property to people who were not James Gandolfini. It tells you what the market had already decided about the asset he had built. And it tells you that the $30 million that left his estate on the way to the government was not a catastrophic share of an ordinary fortune. It was a catastrophic share of something considerably larger than one man's net worth. And the show did not stop generating value after Gandolfini's death. It had not stopped when the original series ended in 2007. The streaming era only deepened what syndication had started. When HBO Max launched in May 2020 as Warner Media's streaming platform, The Sopranos was one of its flagship library titles. The show drove subscriber decisions. New viewers who had never seen it discovered it for the first time. Original viewers returned to it. The asset kept producing years after the man who made it possible had died in room 449 of a hotel in Rome. And then, in October 2021, something happened that nobody in the television industry had seen before in quite that form. Warner Brothers released The Many Saints of Newark, a feature film prequel to The Sopranos, on October 1st, 2021. It was written by David Chase and Lawrence Connor and directed by Alan Taylor, and James Gandolfini's son Michael played the young Tony Soprano. Michael Gandolfini was in his early 20s at the time of the film's release. He had been 14 years old when he found his father unresponsive on a bathroom floor in Rome. He had grown up in the full public shadow of what his father had built, with all the weight that carries, and he had chosen to step directly into the center of that shadow and perform it. The Hollywood Reporter and Variety both noted his performance specifically in their October 2021 reviews, with critics observing that he had found something genuine in the role, rather than simply replicating the surface of his father's iconic work. What they were describing, without using those exact words, was that the son had found a way to inhabit the character that honored it rather than copied it. That is a different and considerably harder thing to do. And the fact that he did it tells you something about what it means to grow up with that kind of legacy in your house, in your name, in your face, every time a stranger recognizes who your father was. Let me tell you what that casting decision represented beyond the sentiment of it. In a production anchored around the Sopranos universe that David Chase had built across 6 seasons and 86 episodes, putting Gandolfini's son at the center of the story was not only an emotional choice, it was a recognition that the name, the face, and the connection to the original Tony Soprano constituted an asset worth activating. That the thing James Gandolfini built was not a closed chapter, it was a living document, an enterprise that kept generating value for the people who held the rights, and, in this specific and remarkable case, for the family of the man who had made it all possible. That is what the $30 million tax bill cannot tell you on its own. The tax bill describes what was lost in the transfer. The prequel film describes what could not be transferred at all, what simply continued, what deepened, what grew. The part of what Gandolfini built that no estate lawyer could quantify because it was not a number. It was a character, a story, a universe that people kept returning to because it said something true about family and loyalty and the gap between who we are and who we tell ourselves we are. James Gandolfini spent more than a decade building something that was larger than his own understanding of it. He came from a working-class family in New Jersey. He bartended and bounced and managed nightclubs before a friend talked him into an acting class. He accumulated small film roles for years before one casting director saw a clip of his work and thought he might be right for a show about a mob boss in therapy. He held out against a network that countersued him for $100 million and came back when the terms reflected what he already knew his work was worth. He wrote personal checks to 16 colleagues who had less leverage than he did. He earned $1 million per episode for an entire final season of a show that the Writers Guild of America had just named the greatest written television series of all time. He accumulated an estate of approximately $70 million. He left for Italy with his son for a trip he was genuinely looking forward to, showing his boy the country their family had come from. And he died in a marble bathroom at 51 years old, with approximately $30 million of what he had built already spoken for by a tax obligation his will had not been designed to prevent. And the show he made kept going. The asset he built kept appreciating. His son stepped into the role he had created and carried it forward for a new generation. Tony Soprano used to talk about getting to the end of something and finding out there was more behind it, more territory that needed handling, more that was woven into the structure of who you were and could not be walked away from. James Gandolfini built something that answers to that description completely. He walked into room 449 on the evening of June 19th, 2013, as one of the most financially consequential performers in the history of American cable television. A man whose work had commanded the highest syndication deal ever paid at the time it was struck. A franchise durable enough that his own son would be cast to carry it forward 8 years after his death in that room. He died the way most people die, suddenly. On an ordinary evening in an extraordinary city, with his teenage son in the next room and a trip to Sicily waiting, and no particular reason to believe the morning would not come. The $30 million was real. The legacy was real. The scale of what he built was real. And room 449 was just a room. 4 walls and a marble bathroom and a view of the fountain of the Naiads. The money was never in the closet. It was in the structure of everything he had made, and everything he had not yet finished making, and everything that kept generating long after the night was over. That is the whole story. Subscribe because this story has more behind it than one episode can hold. And trust me, where we go next, you are going to want to be there.